You're the only power. You're the only power.
I'll be giving you guys a lecture on the Maysville Bill Veto by Andrew Jackson in 1830. Let's start off. After the institution of Jacksonian democracy, President Andrew Jackson took several measures in ensuring that the ideals that pertain to it would be prevalent in American society. Let's first define Jacksonian democracy. It was basically Jackson and his followers, they pushed for an overall democracy that would favor the common man. So he did this, he enforced this belligerently and compulsively, often going out of his way to establish what he believed were the principles of Jacksonian democracy. Oftentimes, they weren't that accurate. Instead of agreeing to potentially good ideas, for example, Jackson vetoed quite a few of them that he believed were an overreach of government power or an encroachment upon the common man's welfare. When Congress voted to put forth government funds into a stock that would help pay for the Maysville Road in Kentucky, Jackson quickly vetoed it. The Maysville Road was going to be constructed through the guidelines of the American system. The American system was made to provide America with several internal improvements that would subsequently provide a stronger infrastructure. These improvements included roads, schools, canals, and those improvements would also be like the equivalent to adding a frozen yogurt place or a Whole Foods in our town. Anyways, Jackson habitually concluded the American system gave a surplus amount of power to the government and left none to the citizens. Jackson justified his veto of the Maysville Road bill by proclaiming it would hurt the national debt and the government had no right to obtain the power it would have as a primary stockholder in the Maysville Road. In preference to making America prosperous, Andrew Jackson primarily focused on shaping it into a democracy that held an appreciation for the common man.
If young Metro don't trust you, I'm gonna shoot you. Beautiful.
Andrew Jackson experienced the Revolutionary War as a child, scarring him but also making him resentful and bitter towards the British. As a 13-year-old, this experience radicalized Jackson's views of authoritative government power and control. Upon his return from war, Jackson self-educated himself and later served in the House of Representatives and Senate, leaving to become a state Supreme Court judge. It was the War of 1812, where he served as a major general and helped win the Battle of New Orleans, gaining him national attention. He was a popular figure and appealed to the people as he was not born into wealth, held little formal education, spoke in basic terms, and was seen as the common man. He had a fast temper, lack of education, and poor manners, which were all attributes of the common man. He ran for president in 1824, losing to John Quincy Adams, who believed that a strong and involved government would result in a strong and sustainable country. Jackson won the popular vote, but not the electoral vote, and he felt that this was an unfair process. The election became known as the corrupt bargain and ended up creating two groups, Jacksonian Democrats and Whigs, who were more conservative and believed in a stronger government. Jackson beat Adams in 1828 and was re-elected as president in 1832. During these two terms, Jackson expressed his disliking for the Whig Party because they favored a strong centralized government. Jackson's election to presidency and the structure of his government that he and his Secretary of State, Martin Van Buren, established became the basis for the modern Democratic Party. Andrew Jackson believed the presidency represented the will of the people, and as such should have broad authority. He was widely criticized for expanding the power of the presidency. He was known for rewarding his political supporters with government jobs, which is essentially like bribery. When reproached, he responded by claiming he was replacing aristocrats with the common man, which is basically admitting to bribery. Jackson's advisors were in unofficial influential roles and included his longtime political allies Martin Van Buren, Francis Preston Blair, Amos Kendall, William B. Lewis, Andrew Donaldson, John Overton, and his new Attorney General, Roger Brooke Taney. Vice President John C. Calhoun was excluded from the group from his unfavorable Federalist views. Political opponents of the Andrew Jackson described the collection of unofficial advisors as the kitchen cabinet. Jackson defended the influence that came from this group, stating that they were actually living in a world, not careerists without perspective. He rarely called upon his regular cabinet officers for counsel. Today this group would be akin to the White House staff versus the formal cabinet positions. Jackson's opposition was against the kitchen cabinet, as they thought this group of advisors maintained great influence over the president, particularly on matters of party and patronage. He constrained power where he thought it needed to be constrained and forced the necessity of a Jacksonian democracy into the American government, whose power was already well distributed amongst the political parties. After the American system gained popularity, Jackson struggled to establish his own ideals without making poor decisions. The American system was a movement intended to promote a strong infrastructure in America. The funding from a national bank, various internal improvements, and a tariff on U.S. goods would be the framework of this infrastructure. Jackson's decision to veto the Maysville Road Bill was directly against the ideals of the American system. This road was to connect Maysville, Kentucky to Lexington, Kentucky, with the goal of making it easier to unify these two cities and encourage the trade amongst them. The Maysville Road Bill allowed for financial aid from the government to build the road. In turn, the government would own stock in the road building company. The bill passed swiftly through Congress, but Andrew Jackson vetoed the bill, claiming that the common man would be severely impacted by the tax burden that would come from the road's construction, and hinder the government's ability to pay off its national debt. Jackson also argued that the government would have too much influence on the road with its funds. Jackson argued in the following excerpt of his veto that the government's power should be confined. In essence, Jackson was arguing that state governments should not have decisions be made for them.
If it be the desire of money that the agency of the federal government should be confined to the appropriation of money in the aid of such undertakings in virtue of state authorities, then the occasion, the manner, and the extent of the appropriations should be made the subject of constitutional regulation. This is the more necessary in order that they may be equitable among the several states, promote harmony between different sections of the Union and their representatives, preserve other parts of the Constitution from being undermined by the exercise of doubtful powers or the too great extension of those which are not so, and to protect the whole subject against the deleterious influence of combinations to carry by concert measures which, considered by themselves, might be but little continence.
So in this excerpt you see Jackson, he's really stating that in order to keep unification, which Americans learned to desire, they needed to agree on preventing an excess of government power. The veto didn't really cause much upheaval in Congress, given that the southern states didn't have a need for canals or new roads, and in New York and Pennsylvania, they had been the ones who were financing their own public works projects. The consequence, however, still existed. For example, if Maysville Road was completed, there would be more interaction between Maysville, Kentucky and Lexington, Kentucky, making a stronger unification between the cities. And it was connections like these that are essential at this point in America, because eventually when there are enough of these small cities unified with each other, the whole country could be accessible to anyone. Personally, Andrew Jackson may have felt slighted that he came from the poor means, and that Henry Clay and others may have gained their political position of power via personal wealth and influence. Thus, some of his positions, such as the one taken on the Maysville Road Bill, may have been taken as a result of his disdain for the likes of John Quincy Adams, Henry Clay, and the ideals of the American system. Well, that's a wrap. Thank you guys for watching. I hope you enjoyed and thought this was informative.
This is that once in a lifetime